What's up everybody, my name's Jay and I'm going to be explaining how to build a computer. So it might sound complicated, but I think that anybody can build one with the help of a guide. So I'm going to try to explain it in the best way that I can. Anyways, let's get right into it. Alright, so the first step to building a computer is picking your parts. And the website that I use for that is called PC Part Picker. It's the website we're on right now. What you do is go to the system builder and it gives you a list of all the parts you need to buy. So for example, we'll choose a CPU and it shows a bunch of CPUs that you can choose from. So for example, let's go with this Intel i7 right here. Now another feature is it'll tell you if the parts you're choosing are actually compatible. So let's go ahead and choose a random motherboard here. And right here it says compatibility warning, see details below. So we go down here and it says the processor does not include a stock CPU cooler. So it tells us to add a cooler. So basically anything that's wrong with the build you're making here, it'll tell you right here at the bottom so you don't buy anything that's not going to work together. Alright, so I already set up a little build just to compare it to a pre-built computer, which is basically when you order it from a company and they build it for you. But it's a lot cheaper to build it yourself, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So I matched up all these parts with the parts from the Ironside Model R computer right here. And as you can see, this one costs 1,282. And if we go back to this one, it says 1,280, and that's not that big of a difference, but one thing to consider is the graphics card shortage that's going on right now. So this GTX 1660 Super should not be anywhere near $650, but there is a shortage going on right now, so prices are kind of sky high where you can buy them. But as you can see, even Ironside doesn't have the graphics card right now, so you can't even buy this. But if we go over here, you can see that the 16 Super is supposed to be $229, and right here it was $234, but it is not available right now. So this is the real price, and taking that into account, this PC would actually cost $860 to build compared to the 1,282 from Ironside. The next thing I want to show is the actual process of building the computer once you get all the parts in the mail. So this is a game or a simulator called PC Building Simulator, and it's actually pretty accurate and a pretty good way to show how to build a computer. So this is what I'm going to be using to show the actual process of building, since I don't have the parts in real life to just go and build a new computer. So this is the build I'm going to be recreating. I picked these parts here because it's similar to my computer in real life, and I'm going to show you exactly how I built it basically. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is set down the case and take off the side panels. So we're going to start by doing that. They usually come with either 2 screws here, 4 screws, or just the 1 screw with this one. So now that's out. Now we're gonna want to remove the back panel as well, so these 2 screws on the back here. Alright, so now so now everything's open and ready to work on. Put that back on. Alright, so the first part we're gonna install is the motherboard. So let's go over here to motherboards, and we're gonna be using this one right here. So all you do is unscrew the screws that are in the motherboard section right here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. Depending on the case, there's going to be a different amount of screws, but they don't all have to be screwed in because different motherboards have different areas where the holes are, and same with the cases. So the next thing we're going to install is the CPU, and we're going to be using the Ryzen 5 3600 for this build. So what you do is you pull this little lever right next to where you install the CPU, and then on the actual CPU chip there's going to be a little arrow on the corner. I'll put up a picture on the screen, and it's going to match up with an arrow on this little pad right here on the motherboard. So you want to line up those arrows and just drop the CPU in. Now you want to add a little bit of thermal paste, which is basically to keep the CPU from touching the very bottom of the cooler, and it keeps it from overheating basically. So if we go down here to tools and software, thermal paste, normally this comes on the bottom of the CPU cooler, so you don't have to worry about this, but it's always good to check. Make sure you also close the lever next to the CPU after you're done installing it. So the next step is to add a CPU cooler, which we're going to be using this one for this build. So you line it up with the 4 screws. There should be 4 on either side of here. And you just drop it in, screw it in. And then it'll ask you to connect the cables. So if we go to cable, we can connect the air cooler to the corresponding port up here, which is for the air cooler. It'll be labeled on the motherboard. Now, normally what I do and what most people do is do this whole motherboard setup with the CPU and the CPU cooler before you actually screw it into the case, because it just makes it a lot easier when you don't have to tilt the case and you can just work with the motherboard on its own. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is install the RAM, which goes in these slots right next to the CPU cooler. So we're going to go over here and be using 3200 megahertz RAM. So if you're only using 2 sticks of RAM, you're going to want to put them in slots 1 and 3 or slots 2 and 4. You never want to put them side by side. I'm not really sure the reason for that, but that's just how it works. So what you do is you open these clips on either side of the RAM slot and you install the RAM. In real life, you have to push down pretty hard, but you'll hear it audibly click, and that's how you know it's in there. So don't worry about putting too much pressure, because it'll click in eventually. So we're going to go ahead and install the other stick of RAM in slot number 3, alternating slots. And yeah, now your RAM's installed. Next thing we're going to do is install the graphics card, which goes right here. So to do that, we have to remove the PCI covers that the graphics card is going to interfere with. So this is where we're going to be able to plug in our monitors on the back from the graphics card. So for this build, it's looking like it's going to be this PCI slot and this PCI slot. So we're going to remove both of those, go to install, and we're going to be using a 1060 OC. So let's install that right here, screw it back in, and boom, just like with the RAM, this will click into the slot, so don't be afraid to apply some pressure. Next, we're going to be installing our hard drives. So to install the regular hard drive, we're going to remove this mount right here and open the drive bay. So right in here, we can put the drive right in. So if we go to storage, get a 3 terabyte drive, all you do is just drop it right in here, close the drive bay, and close the hatch on it. And now your hard drive is installed. So we can go ahead and put this mount back on. So before we install our SSD, which is going to go right here, we have to install the power supply, which is going to go underneath. So we have to take off this shroud right here, and now we can install the power supply, which is going to be a 650 watt power supply by Cooler Master. So it's this one right here. We install it right here, making sure that the power plug is coming out of the back of the computer, and this is also where we screw it in. So we chose a 650 watt power supply because of the parts used here. On PC Part Picker, it'll tell you if the power supply is too weak for the parts or if it's maybe too strong, but that's not really a bad thing. But basically you need enough wattage in here to basically power up all the parts. So now that that's done, we can go back and put the PSU shroud on again, and now we can install our SSD, which is basically the same as a hard drive, but it's a lot faster, and it's ideal for using as a Windows boot drive because it makes your PC start up a lot faster and also run a lot faster. So we're going to install that right now. We're going to be using this one, so you can see it's an SSD, and all you do is drop it right onto here. In some cases it'll have you mount it up here, but in my case, for example, I'll put a video on screen right now. All I do is just leave it hanging from the cable basically, and it still works just the same, so it doesn't really matter where you put it. Alright, so now that all of our parts are in place, it's time to plug in all the cables. So what we can start with is the hard drive. This is why we took the back off of the case, because you want to be able to access the cables back here and clean it up a little bit. So if you connect the hard drive here, this connects to the power supply, which it draws power from, obviously. And then this other port is called the SATA port, and it connects usually right over here on the motherboard, and there's also some down here. So we're also going to connect the SSD, which connects the exact same way. So it's going to connect to the power supply down there and to a SATA port on the motherboard. Now that's all connected. Next thing we want to do is connect the graphics card to the power supply. So we're going to click here, and that wire is going to go down to the power supply here. Next, we're going to connect the motherboard also to the power supply. So mainly everything runs through the power supply because it obviously needs power. So basically everything's powered by the power supply besides the case fans, which are directly powered by the motherboard, but the motherboard is powered by the power supply, so it's all connected pretty much. But what we can do is get the cable for the case fan right here, and it plugs into these pins down here on the motherboard. Sometimes they're up here, but most of the time they are down here. So the next thing we can do is connect these buttons up here and these USB drives to make sure they work. So that's what this cable's for. It also goes right down here. We can also connect this case fan. Looks like on this motherboard there's another fan port right here. These are all labeled by the word fan, so it's pretty easy to distinguish. And next we got to get power for our CPU, so that's where it connects to, and it goes right down to the power supply. So now everything in the computer is connected, and all that's left to connect are the external wires. So at this point we can put back on the side panels, and it's right here. Screw these back in. The last thing we have to do is plug in all the external cables and the USB boot drive, which comes with the computer when you buy it. As you can see from PC Part Picker, we included Windows 10 Home in the cost because they'll send you a little USB flash drive, just like this one. So all you do is plug that in, and it has Windows installed on it. You just go through the install process, and yeah, that's basically that. I'll show you that in a minute though. So we're going to want to plug in all these cables. This one goes into the graphics card, so that means it's for the monitor. This one is probably a keyboard or a mouse, so it's plugging into a normal USB port. This one's for the power supply. Also make sure this switch right here is turned to on, as you can see. I think there's one more cable, yep. This is also just a keyboard or a mouse because it's plugging into a USB. So the last thing to do is plug in the boot drive, which is right here. Just a normal USB flash drive, and power it up. So as you can see, it booted up fine, and it's all working, so we did it right. In real life, what you would do is just go through a little Windows installation. You would choose the boot drive. So if you only have one drive, it's automatic, but since we have two drives in here, a hard drive and an SSD, I would choose the SSD to boot from, and it would install Windows on that drive. So that's basically it, how to build a computer. Thank you for watching.